just gonna go ahead and premise this video with I didn't like these books, so I already suck at character names, so if I mess up the character names of these, we're just gonna have to roll with it. Hey friends, what is up and welcome back. As you guys can tell from the title of today's video, we are going to be doing my most disappointing books of 2020. I have 5 of them, and these are disappointing for very different reasons, I feel like. Let me know down below your most disappointing or your top 5 most disappointing books in 2020, unless you're like me and you only managed to read like 40 books this year. I had a very small number to choose from. I feel like a lot of people are like, oh my god, it's so hard narrowing down to 5. Well, you know, for me it was actually pretty easy. It was actually kind of hard coming up with 5 because I read so little, but basically I'm going to go ahead and jump off. The first book that I read that was one of my least favorites is Love Her or Lose Her. I cannot remember the female main character's name. Yeah, no, I can't remember it, but Dom is her husband, Dominic. Basically what happens is his wife comes home one day, our main character comes home, and she decides that she loves Dom, but she's no longer really feeling the passion. Basically, he is a war vet, and when he came home, she found him very cold and unloving compared to how he used to be, but he is definitely spicy in the bedroom, but only one day a week when they know that that is the day that they are going to have sex. So this book is a bit weird in that our main character is attempting to follow her own dreams, her own goals, what she wants to do, because she realized that Dom isn't going to be there for her on that journey, so she decides to do it on her own. But basically, Dom doesn't want to give up, and they end up going to couples therapy, and that is sort of what the book follows. So the reason why I don't like this book is I found Dom very domineering, haha. I found him very cold and unlikable, and not in like a unlikable main character that you actually sort of like. Those are some of my favorite kind of characters, but I just didn't like him as a dude. Like, he was very like domineering, very like, you're gonna do it how I want to do it. But at the same time, and that's how he was, Rosie, that's her name, but that's how he outwardly portrayed himself to Rosie, I think that's her name. But he on the inside was very fluffy and like, he's like, I don't understand like what's happening, why she wants to leave. I just want to provide for her and love her, and couldn't for some reason get through his head that that's not what she wanted. This is a classic tale of miscommunication between characters. It would have been so easy if one of them would have just opened their mouths and been like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And like, there's so many times in the book where I wanted to strangle the characters because they were not communicating with each other. They weren't talking about how they were feeling. They weren't talking about concerns that they had. And I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense that he is a veteran, and if you are like family members of a veteran, married to a veteran, you know, whatever it may be, you know that there is a bit of a shutdown that does happen because acclimating back to normal life is really difficult following that. So I sort of get that, but I think it was handled very badly. I think that maybe there could have been, you know, an emphasis on Dom finding help by himself, or, you know, like her going off and finding help for herself, because they are high school sweethearts. So for me, it was just it was a very blah book. Like, and even the sex was really bad. The sex was very awkward. It felt more like the author had read or has like an interest in like a little bit of like kinky stuff, and she kind of tried to portray that in these characters and failed miserably. So I just really don't like this book. I don't remember what I rated it, but I don't think it's very high. I won't be reading the next one. I know these are fan favorites from people, but guys, there's so many better books out there. I would skip these. The next one that I didn't like at all, and I was actually 100% crushed by this, is Aurora Burning. So I think I'm just done with Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. Like, I don't want to read anything else from them, because what I loved from the first book, because Aurora Rising was one of my favorite reads of last year, what I love from that book, they just completely undid in this one. So there is a character death that happens in the first one, and you kind of get glimpses of that character in the second one, and I was like, well, it's as if she didn't even really die. You know, that she does come back in like a different way, but whatever, that really put me off. Also, there is a love interest, like a love story that happens in this book that is literally jammed into your face almost the entire book, and I found it very cringy, very uncomfortable. And Jay and Amy like to do that, which is kind of sad, but their romances for me just don't really, like, they're not really my favorite. They don't really feel, they feel very two-dimensional. They don't really feel very thought out. Overall, I just wasn't a fan of this book. I was super let down. Like, the side characters for me, like Tyler and his sister and some of the other characters really carried the book, but there's not a whole lot of emphasis on them. It does have the snark that I do like from both authors, but the thing is, I can only hear the same regurgitated jokes over and over again, or the same kind of tone of regurgitated jokes over and over again, before I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to keep hearing these. This isn't really funny anymore, and that's kind of where the book left me. I'm really, really sad about that one, unfortunately. The next book that I read was Well Played, and I remember neither of the characters' names for this one, which is kind of sad. This one wasn't a huge letdown to me, but it was definitely more of a letdown than I wanted it to be. So basically, this follows a character that you were introduced to in Well Met, which is the first book. There's not really going to be spoilers in this, but basically, Stacy, that was her name. Our main character, Stacy from Well Met, she's the side character from Well Met, becomes the main character in this one. And essentially, Stacy wants to escape her small town life, but the last time she decided to attempt to escape small town life, her mom had an accident, and so she ended up staying. So it was kind of cool. I think when I read this, I was talking about how it's a little bit different from Well Met because the main character in Well Met loves the small town life, and Stacy in this one obviously doesn't. She wants to get out and experience different things. So I did like that. What I didn't like about this book, the rest of the plot is essentially that she's hooking up with a guy during Renaissance Festival. The book starts at the end of this year's Renaissance Festival, and she reaches out to him, and because she wants more of a relationship with him, and it doesn't necessarily make it to him, it actually makes it to his cousin. And you know this very early on, like halfway, like 40% way through the book, you figure out kind of who he is. But that's kind of like the premise, is that who she's speaking to isn't who she thinks she's speaking to. And then the second half of the book is them kind of meeting and, well, not meeting, but meeting as like a couple and trying to, you know, work things out. The reason why this was a disappointing book, but not necessarily a bad book per se, is that it didn't hit. Like, it did not hit me like Well Met did. Well Met, to me, and I read it right before I read this one, I reread it. Still solid, still one of my favorites. It didn't have the same feel. It didn't have the same emotions. It didn't have the same like characters and their banter and things like that. It just sort of missed the mark, and it was, for me, pretty disappointing. I was going into it thinking that this was 100% going to be a 5-star read, because I thought that given the same author and the same writing style, that it would carry as well as Well Met did, but unfortunately it just didn't. So not a terrible book. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. I ended up rounding up to 4, but it was just disappointing in that I wasn't absolutely in love with it like I was Well Met, which is really unfortunate. Well Played was just I don't know, a little bit of a knockoff to me. That's sort of what I felt like. The next book that I read that I really didn't like was The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren. Now, I don't remember any of the characters' names, but basically all you need to know is that it follows 2 assistants to imagine the couple from Fixer Upper, Chip and Joanna Gaines. Basically that is who they're supposed to be. Like, they even reference Chip and Joanna in the story, but there are 2 characters who are assistants to Chip and Joanna. The girl main character, she is the assistant to Joanna, basically, and she designs a lot of the designs they put into houses. What I did like about the book is that she does have a little bit of a disability when it comes to like mobility in her hands. She does have a chronic illness that not illness, but like disability that she deals with. And the other main character is an engineer who works with the Chip of the couple, and basically what happens is they end up having to go on tour with them. And the reason why this is a big deal is because they are launching a marriage book, but at the same time, their relationship is 1000% crumbling. So the story is told from the perspective of the 2 assistants and them kind of like trying to keep shit in order without everything blowing up, because all of their livelihood is at stake. Now, the reason why I didn't like this book, a lot of miscommunication. Once again, I don't like books where you could simply open your mouth and kind of state how you are feeling. There's a lot of times when I'm reading a book and it seems very unrealistic to me when there is some kind of issue that happens when it could very much so be solved by just sitting down and talking about what happened, or talking about what you're thinking about doing, or talking about what you're thinking about not doing. Those kind of issues in books, because romance books tend to follow a kind of like, I don't know, like storyline, like couple meets, couple falls, you know, for each other, they start having sex, whatever. Then there's a big traumatic event and then they get back together. That's like just how romance tends to be. The issue that happens in this book I thought was just so stupid, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I was like, wow, it would have taken you 3 seconds to open your mouth and be like, hey, no, but no one fucking does that in this book. The only interesting thing about this book was actually the like Chip and Joanna of the story. I thought that they were kind of interesting in that I love Fixer Upper. That's one of my favorite shows. So to kind of see like what could be like an alternative version of them, I thought that was kind of cool. But this book just didn't really hit the mark. Now, it wasn't the worst Christina Lauren book I've read recently. A lot of their newer stuff I've absolutely hated, but this one I didn't hate. I just wasn't 100% in love with it, so it was once again another disappointing book. The last book that I want to talk about, I read this the very beginning of the year, so pardon me, I'm gonna fuck up everything. I'm just gonna tell you what I didn't like about this book. It's Middle Game. I read this in January. I think I started it December of last year going into January, so it was like one of the I think it might have been the first book that I read in 2020, like finished in 2020. I hated this book. I know people love it, and I don't see why. It follows two characters, and they are basically, I believe, like orphans, but they are part of a grander scheme. Now, like I said, excuse me, I don't like this book, and usually when I don't like a book, I don't really tend to try to remember a whole lot. Things that I didn't like about this book, though, is I was so fucking confused by the story. And I know people are going to be like, oh, you didn't understand it and that's why you didn't like it. Like, no, I just didn't like it. I felt like it wasn't very, it was more whimsical and very like, I don't know, just like the writing style. I always want to say floral, but that's not the word I'm looking for. There's like a word that people use that my brain does not want to actually retain so that I can later on use it. But basically the writing style is too like fantastical for me, I guess is what you could say. But also I think it's just really poor storytelling. It just didn't really sink into my brain. Like even now I struggle to 100% remember. I did like the sort of action-y parts of this book and the kind of like, I don't want to say like time travel, but sort of. I just think that this author is not for me. Shauna Maguire is not for me. There are other authors that I've read that are similar, like Laini Taylor has sort of a similar writing style, and for some reason her writing style just doesn't really sit with me, but I read The Starless Sea this year and absolutely loved it, and that also has similar writing style. So there's just something about like the Shauna Maguire or Laini Taylor kind of writing, I mean, the way that they tell stories, that they are incredibly just like non-memorable to me. Like they don't stick into my brain. I don't care about the characters. I don't care about the plot. Like I said, I did read this in January, so I'm sure if you go back on my channel towards the beginning of this year, you will see me kind of speak more about it. But I just know, like looking through my list of books on Goodreads, that this was a huge disappointment because I know everybody loved this book. If you didn't like this book, let me know. Let me know why you didn't like it. But for me, it was just too out there. It was too, like, I felt like the plot didn't make any sense to me, and I felt like the plot was kind of hard to follow. So that is disappointing, but it is what it is. So those are my bottom 5 books of 2020. Like I said, let me know down below your least favorite book. If you liked any of these, let me know why you liked them. If you agree with me and you didn't like them, let me know why you didn't like them. But I love you guys so much. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video.